This picture was taken at the Massachusetts Danvers State Hospital in 1871. Katie Doyle is the girl you're seeing. She is only 9 years old. But take a close look at this picture. Look at her eyes, how stiff she is standing, and the look on her face that doesn't belong on a child's face. Katherine Doyle went against everything doctors in the 1800s thought they knew about the mind. Even now, more than 150 years later, her case is still not clear. One of the most disturbing and haunting medical secrets of the 1800s was caught on camera in this picture. Medicine today can't explain what happened to Katherine Doyle. Psychology can't explain it, and maybe we'll never really understand it. The story you're about to hear, on the other hand, is not like any other medical case. This story makes you think about the very edges of what it means to be human. We need to go back to 1871 to fully understand Katherine Doyle's case. 6 years after the end of the Civil War, America was still getting over the damage it had done. Boston was a city that was changing. It was full of Irish people who had left their home country to find a better life in America. Psychiatric care was just getting started and was very rough. Asylums were dark, lonely places where people who were thought to be mentally ill were kept out of sight of other people. People didn't really understand mental illness, psychological illnesses, or how children grow and learn. Things that didn't fit with society norms were put away and forgotten. One of these creepy places was the Danvers State Hospital, where Katherine would spend her last years. It was built on land that used to be Salem Farms, so it had both the bad reputation of old medicine and the dark sounds of American past. People were put through long, cold baths, extreme physical restraint, sensory isolation, and medical tests that may or may not have been legal. These things happened in the hallways of that place. In this harsh and scientifically limited setting, Katherine Doyle would become one of the most famous and disturbing cases in the history of psychology in the 1800s. It's also important to remember that the doctors at the time, no matter how well-meaning they were, just didn't have the right ideas or technology to understand what they were seeing. Katherine Doyle was born in the middle of Boston on March 15, 1862. Irish parents, Patrick and Mary Doyle, brought their daughter to America in search of a better life. Patrick was a longshoreman in Boston's busy port. He helped load and unload ships that brought goods from all over the world. Some of the nicest homes on Beacon Hill hired Mary as a housekeeper. She cooked and cleaned for Boston's wealthy families. The Doyle family lived in a small 2-room apartment in the North End, which was mostly Irish and had bad living conditions. However, the community was united by their Catholic religion and their shared experience of coming to America as immigrants. Katherine grew up hearing older neighbors speak Irish, smelling fresh bread from nearby bakers, and hearing her maternal grandmother tell stories about old Ireland. Family papers and parish records show that Katherine was a completely normal child for the first 7 years of her life. For her age, she was playful, interested, and smart, but in the normal range for a girl from her social class and time. Her mother made rag dolls for her to play with. She also did simple jobs around the house and went to St. Leonard's Church for Sunday Mass, where she learned basic Latin prayers. Katherine went to a private school, and her teachers said she was a hard worker who wasn't especially smart. She picked up reading and writing at a normal rate, liked stories from the Bible, and got along well with other kids. Very strange things were going to happen, but her behavior, growth, or personality didn't hint at them at all. Katherine was my sweet girl, Mary Doyle always said in later talks with doctors. She was a loving child who liked helping her mom in the kitchen and got upset when her dad got home late from work. Patrick called his daughter the light of our house. He said she brought happiness and normalcy to his life, which was otherwise hard because he lived in a poor city. Everything changed so quickly and dramatically in September 1869 that doctors and experts still don't agree on what really happened to Katherine Doyle that month. Tuesday, September 14th, 1869, was the day Mary Doyle would always remember as the day she lost her daughter. Katherine woke up that morning different, in a real way. She always looked the same. She had the same round, freckled face, curly brown hair, and short height of a 7-year-old girl. But during the night something very important had changed, and it had nothing to do with how they looked. The first signs were not very clear. Katherine's wake-up time was later than usual for a child who had always been a morning person. When she finally got down to breakfast, she moved differently. She was more deliberate and precise, like she had thought about every step. Even scarier was the fact that she didn't say, "Good morning, Mommy," and "Good morning, Daddy," which was how they usually did it. When Mary asked Katherine if she was feeling better, she answered, but her voice had changed. She just sat at the table and stared blankly at her parents. Mary would later describe her face as empty, but at the same time, very, very old. Not a huge change, but enough to be noticed. It seemed rougher and more grown up, like it came from someone much older. In the weeks that followed, it was impossible to ignore how Katherine had changed. She started showing skills that a child her age and from her family's background just couldn't have. During family meals, she casually talked about past events in a very accurate way. She talked about the American Revolutionary War as if she had been there herself, describing specific battles in ways that her basic parochial school didn't teach them. Even scarier, Katherine started to show that she knew a lot about old Greek philosophy. She used quotes from Aristotle and Plato, not like a child who had learned words by heart, but like someone who really understood difficult intellectual ideas. Patrick asked Katherine where she learned these things, and Katherine just smiled and said, "I've always known these things." This smile grew scary for her parents. Katherine's religious understanding also grew in a strange way. She started reading whole sections of the Bible in Latin. These weren't just the easy prayers she had learned in church. They were also hard-to-understand Old Testament passages that most priests had to look up in books. When Father O'Brien from St. Leonard's Church tested her, he was shocked to find that Katherine could talk about complicated theology like a seminary student in their last year. But what might have been most troubling was how much Katherine knew about the people around her. No one had told her the private details about her neighbors and family friends, but she did. She casually talked about marital problems in the neighborhood, hidden debts, and even moral transgressions that no one was meant to know about. Even though Katherine's knowledge that couldn't be true was already scary, it was soon clear that her change was much worse. She became morbidly interested in death and pain, which was very different from the sweet person she had been for the first 7 years of her life. Katherine started to ask specific technical questions about how people died. These weren't the kinds of questions a kid naturally has about death, but they were about things like execution methods, torture in the Middle Ages, and diseases that kill. She talked very accurately about how the Spanish Inquisition tortured people, how old cultures killed people, and even how the Egyptians mummified their dead. What was most scary was that Katherine seemed to enjoy these accounts. When she talked about pain, her eyes would light up, and her smile would give the adults around her chills. The smile wasn't innocent like a child's. It was planned and almost cruel. Katherine also got attached to physical pain in a disturbing way. To make herself hurt, she started to scratch herself with her own nails until she bled, bite her lips until they were raw, and hit her head against walls hard enough to leave marks. But what was scariest was that she didn't seem upset when she was cutting herself. She actually seemed to be in a state of ecstasy, as if the pain was giving her some kind of strange joy. Mary Doyle tried more than once to stop Katherine from hurting herself, but she always found a way to do it. She cut and scratched herself with things that didn't seem dangerous, like loose nails in the walls, broken glass, and even kitchen tools. When people asked her why she did it, she just said she felt like it, or something told her to do it. Katherine's attitude toward animals also changed a lot. Before, she was nice to the area cats that lived on the streets and the dog that lived next door. After she changed, animals started to intentionally avoid her. When she came close, dogs would bark, cats would run away, and birds didn't seem to want to fly near her either. Katherine gave Mary that cold smile and said, "They know what I am now, Mommy. They're smarter than you." Mary then asked Katherine why the animals were acting this way. Over the course of several months, Katherine's case went beyond changes in her behavior and thinking. It started to happen that she could do things physically that shouldn't have been possible for a child her age and build. The first sign that stood out was her unusually high power. Katherine had always been a small, healthy girl, but all of a sudden she could break things very easily. In December 1869, she was so angry that she used only her hands to break a strong oak chair in half. Patrick, who worked every day with heavy wood at the port, looked at the broken chair and didn't understand what was wrong. The wood was broken in a way that would take a lot of force, more than a child could put together. On another occasion, Katherine made lasting marks in the family's wooden kitchen table with her fingers. Not just scratches, but deep marks that looked like her little fingers were as hard and pressed down as metal tools. Mary tried to sand off the marks, but they were too deep. They will always be there as a disturbing memory of how strong her daughter is for no reason. Katherine also started to show strange physical resistance. She could stay in uncomfortable positions for hours on end without getting tired or showing signs of pain. One time, Mary found her standing still in the middle of the living room at 2 o'clock in the morning, looking at the wall. Katherine said she hadn't moved since dinner, which was more than 6 hours ago when she was asked about it. Katherine's ability to handle the cold was especially amazing. During Boston's harsh winter of 1869 to 1870, she often went outside wearing a lot less clothing than the weather called for. She didn't seem to mind the cold, even though other people in the area were shivering. Patrick found her sleeping in the snow-covered garden one memorable night. She was only wearing her nightgown and didn't seem cold or uncomfortable. But the change in Katherine's eyes might have been the most troubling physical sign. A number of neighbors and family friends started to say that there was something wrong with her gaze. They said that her eyes were hypnotic and almost predatory. People who looked directly at Katherine for long amounts of time said they felt dizzy, had headaches, and a strange sense of fear. Mary saw that Katherine's eyes seemed to change color sometimes, maybe because of the light or her mood. They were usually brown, but sometimes they looked almost black, especially during her most upsetting moments. Mary was sure that there were other forms moving in the depths of Katherine's pupils some days. It was like someone or something else was looking through her daughter's eyes. As Katherine's behavior got worse and harder to understand, Patrick and Mary Doyle did what any worried parent would do. They locked her up. They looked for help everywhere. Since they were staunch Catholics, the church was the first place they went. Father Timothy O'Brien of St. Leonard's Church had known Katherine since she was a baby. He had baptized her and led her first communion. He had always thought she was one of the nicest kids in his church. At first, he didn't believe the stories the Doyles told him when they asked for his help. He thought that this must be a tough time for many kids, made worse by the worried thoughts of caring parents. This view quickly changed after Father O'Brien met Katherine in person. He tried to talk to the girl about easy religious things when he went to the Doyles' house as a pastor in January 1870. To his surprise, Katherine not only had a huge amount of theological knowledge, but she also started to question basic parts of Catholic teaching with complex arguments that he rarely heard from even the most advanced seminarians. Things got even scarier when Katherine showed she knew private things about the priest's life that he had never told anyone. He kept his faith questions a secret, and she talked about sins he had done in the past and events from his childhood in a small Irish town. The priest was shocked and asked Katherine how she knew these things. Katherine just smiled and said, "I knew many things about many people." Father O'Brien chose to do an exorcism because he was sure he was dealing with something that doctors couldn't explain. On a night in February 1870, the rite took place at the Doyle's house with only the family and an old deacon present. Father O'Brien never talked about what happened in this ceremony in public. His personal diaries, which were found decades later, were the only place he wrote that it was the most terrifying experience of my entire priestly life. During the exorcism, Katherine didn't react the way religious books said a possessed person should. She didn't squirm, scream, or curse to show that she was in pain. She instead laughed, and it was a loud laugh that seemed to come from more than one voice at the same time. And then, much to the priest's horror, she started to say the exorcism rite with him, word for word, in perfect Latin, knowing every word before he said it. After the exorcism didn't work, the Doyles turned to medicine, thinking that science could explain things that religion couldn't. One of the few doctors in Boston who specialized in mental disorders and had studied in Europe, where better psychiatric methods were being made, was Dr. Henry Morrison. They went to see him. Dr. Morrison was very careful and was known for taking a very scientific approach to his work and writing up clinical cases in great detail. When the Doyles asked for his help, he treated Katherine's case with a healthy dose of professional skepticism. He thought she was a very smart child who might be going through some kind of mental trauma. He had a very different view after his first meetings with Katherine. During 2 busy weeks in February and March 1870, the doctor carefully recorded every detail of the girl's behavior and skills during examinations. His reports, which can still be found in Boston's medical history files, are very upsetting to read. Morrison noticed right away that Katherine was smarter than normal, but she only talked about sad and disturbing things. She knew more about the human body than most medical students, could explain rare diseases with exact symptoms, and even came up with treatments that were cutting edge at the time. Katherine always drew and wrote during lessons, but her drawings weren't the usual flowers, houses, or animals that kids her age make. Instead, she made detailed pictures of human bodies that were exactly the way they should be, scenes of death and decomposition, and people who were in terrible pain. Her drawings were technically very good, which is something that a child who hadn't had official art training shouldn't have been able to do. Dr. Morrison was especially interested in what Katherine wrote. She wrote well in Latin, ancient Greek, and even some basic Egyptian hieroglyphs, all of which she had never learned. When people asked her where she learned these languages, she just said, the words came to her when she needed to use them. However, Dr. Morrison was most upset by Katherine's eyes. He talked a lot about the strange feeling he had when he looked straight at her in his reports. According to him, it was very uncomfortable, like being examined by an intelligence much older and more experienced than should exist in such a young mind. During his exams, the doctor also noticed some strange physical features. Katherine's body temperature was always lower than usual, but she didn't seem to be getting too cold. Her heart rate was normal, but very slow. Even stranger, plants in his office started to die when Katherine was there for long amounts of time, even though everything else stayed the same. Something happened on a very cold February night in 1870 that finally got Katherine admitted to Danvers Hospital. The event was so strange and hard to understand that it convinced even the doubters that Katherine needed specialized medical care right away. Somehow, Patrick Doyle knew something wasn't right when he woke up at 3 a.m. He thought the house was too quiet and that the air felt especially cold, even though it was the middle of winter in Boston. When he went to check on the family, he saw that Katherine wasn't in her bed. Patrick looked out the kitchen window and saw a small figure standing in the snowy garden. He had looked all over the house but couldn't find her. Katherine was standing in the middle of the yard, not moving at all, and was only wearing her thin white cotton nightgown. It started to snow during the night, and she was in the middle of a storm. Some of her body was already covered in snow. Why Katherine was where she was shocked Patrick the most. She stood with her arms outstretched toward the sky, like she was welcoming the storm. She stood still with her head tilted back and eyes fixed on the night sky, even though there were strong winds and a lot of snow. Patrick ran outside because he thought his daughter might be severely hypothermic or even worse. But when he got to her, he was shocked to see that Katherine wasn't shaking or clearly in pain from the cold, even though she had been out in the storm for hours. Even though her skin felt like ice, she was breathing properly and seemed fully awake. Kate slowly turned to look at Patrick when he tried to bring her inside. He would never forget what he saw that day. Kate's eyes were totally black. Not just enlarged pupils, totally black, like there was no iris or white to be seen. When she spoke, her voice sounded like it came from everywhere, not just her mouth. She looked right at Patrick with those impossible. In the morning, after what happened in the backyard, Patrick, Mary, Father O'Brien, and Dr. Morrison made the hardest choice of their lives. They had been up all night worrying about it and had talked about it for hours. Katherine was going to be taken to Danvers State Hospital. The choice wasn't made without much thought. Everyone concerned knew they were dealing with something they didn't fully understand. Father O'Brien admitted that his spiritual powers were not enough. Dr. Morrison admitted that he had never seen a case like Katherine's before, and that he would need the facilities and resources of a specialized institution to even begin to understand her situation. Patrick and Mary's decision to give up their only daughter to medical professionals broke them mentally. They knew, though, that Katherine was dangerous, not just to herself but also to other people. Her magical strength, impossible knowledge, and increasingly disturbing behavior made things so bad that they could not go on. Danvers Hospital was picked because it was thought to be one of the best places in New England to treat mental illnesses. The hospital had some of the most up-to-date European psychiatry methods and the tools to keep a lot of medical records under the direction of Dr. Elias Hartwell. Katherine was taken from her home in Boston to the hospital in Danvers on the morning of March 15, 1870, exactly 1 year after her 8th birthday. She did everything that was asked of her and seemed to understand what was going on in a way that was way beyond her years. When they were riding in the carriage to Danvers, Katherine kept quiet and looked out the window with that old-fashioned face that had come to define her. To Dr. Morrison, who was with her only once, she said, "You're going to try to photograph me, aren't you, Doctor? It will be interesting to see what your camera can capture." Danvers State Hospital was a big and scary place to be. It was built in the Gothic Revival style, which was popular at the time for building institutions. The main building was built on hills with a view of the farmland in Massachusetts. It was more than a kilometer long, and its pointed towers and arched windows gave it a look more like a medieval castle than a modern hospital. The institution was built around the ideas of moral treatment, a psychiatric philosophy that said patients could get better with a structured schedule, therapeutic work, and a safe environment. It was, in theory, a new and compassionate way to treat mental disease. In reality, Danvers Hospital had turned into a place where people who were thought to be sick or dangerous to live alone were locked up. When Katherine got there in March 1870, There were more than 600 people in the hospital, and the conditions were terrible. The long, dark hallways were always filled with disturbing sounds, like patients screaming in pain, the jingling of keys and chains, and people talking incoherently. A strong disinfectant smell tried to cover up the smell of pee, sweat, and human misery, but failed. Dr. Elias Hartwell, the institution's head doctor, was a 52-year-old man who had spent his whole life studying mental illnesses. Hartwell was a graduate of Harvard University and had studied briefly in Paris with some of the founders of European psychology. He saw himself as a progressive scientist and was determined to use careful observation and documentation to help doctors learn more about the mind. Hartwell thought that Katherine might have another case of childhood hysteria or some other kind of developmental disorder when she was taken to his office for the required first exam. He had read Dr. Morrison's reports, but he kept a good dose of professional doubt about the more unbelievable claims they made. Within the first few minutes of talking to Katherine, this view changed a great deal. She came into his office with a nurse and still wore the simple dress she had worn on the trip from Boston. She didn't show any of the usual signs of nervousness, confusion, or fear that new patients, especially kids, show. Instead, she looked at the office with cold eyes, as if she were judging not only the space but also Dr. Hartwell himself. Before Hartwell could even start his normal check, Katherine shocked him by giving him specifics about 3 hospital patients who had recently died. She knew their full names, the exact times they died, and, most upsettingly, private details about the causes of their deaths that were only available in medical records that were locked down and she couldn't have seen. Even more shocking was the fact that Katherine knew personal things about Dr. Hartwell that he had never told anyone else. She talked about specific things that happened to him as a child, choices he had made at work that caused him trouble, and even parts of his personal life that had caused problems in his marriage. Hartwell, who looked scared, asked Katherine how she knew these things. Katherine just smiled that cold smile that had become her trademark and said, "I had ways of knowing things about interesting people." At first, Katherine was put in the hospital's infant ward, which was a small area with rooms for about 20 kids with different kinds of mental illnesses. Sister Margaret O'Connell, an Irish nun who had worked with troubled kids for more than 15 years and thought she knew how to handle tough cases, was in charge of the ward. Katherine's appearance in the pediatric ward quickly turned into a problem, but not for the reasons the medical staff thought at first. Katherine wasn't mean to the other kids, didn't seem to be a problem, and mostly followed the basic rules of the facility. It was a more subtle problem that was more upsetting in many ways than open aggression. Katherine had a strange effect on the other kids in the ward that no one could explain. 3 kids, who were thought to be pretty stable before she got there, started acting in very strange ways within a week of her arrival. They stopped doing normal things for fun and stopped answering questions regularly when asked by medical staff. Instead, they would sit in silence for hours at a time, staring fixedly at certain spots on the walls as if they could see something adults couldn't. A 6-year-old girl named Emma Sullivan was admitted because she was having frequent night terrors after her parents died in a terrible carriage accident. She started talking nonstop about a dark figure she said was always in the ward. Emma consistently and accurately described the being as a very tall woman dressed entirely in black with long dark hair that seemed to move even when there was no wind, and eyes she described as dark holes where there should be light. What was most disturbing was that all the kids who started acting strangely described the same figure. The same height, appearance, and specifics about clothing and physical traits, as if they were all seeing the same thing, something adults couldn't see but felt very real to them. At first, Sister Margaret tried to brush these visions off as mass hysteria, or overactive childhood fantasy, But her worry grew when she saw that these kids were also showing signs of knowing things they shouldn't have. They talked about Katherine's life before she was admitted, including specific talks she had with her parents, and even specifics about the Doyle family home in Boston, which none of them had ever been to. Tim Chen, a 9-year-old boy from China, whose parents had been admitted because he had selective mutism, started talking freely about Katherine's childhood in Ireland, including stories about cousins who had died before she was born. What kind of inside knowledge does Timothy have about an Irish-American family? How could any of these kids have seen these private details? The kids started acting in a coordinated way, like they were following invisible orders. This made things even scarier. They moved through the ward hallways in certain patterns and sat at meals in certain geometric shapes. Sometimes they spoke at the same time, reciting words in languages that none of them had learned. As Dr. Hartwell watched these changes happen, he became more and more worried that Katherine might be changing the behavior of other kids in ways he couldn't figure out or find. His careful observations showed patterns of behavior that didn't fit with common psychological theories. After carefully watching Katherine for 6 weeks, Dr. Hartwell made the hard choice to move her to a private room in the hospital's isolation area. The decision wasn't based on her angry or annoying behavior, but on how she had an uncontrollable effect on other kids and the need to look into her case more carefully. Katherine's isolation room was on the 3rd floor of the hospital's east wing, away from the main areas of action. The cell was about 3 by 4 meters and had only an iron bed with a thin cushion, a small wooden table, a simple chair, and a metal bucket for personal items. During the day, there was only one small window with iron bars around it that let in some natural light. Being put in isolation was the start of a more intense period of medical and observational tests. Dr. Hartwell was determined to figure out what was wrong with Katherine, and if possible, write about it in a way that would help scientists learn a lot about rare mental illnesses. The daily therapy meetings I had with Katherine quickly took on a strange personality. Katherine didn't just quietly answer the doctor's questions like most patients do. Instead, she often took charge of conversations and led them in directions that made Hartwell very uncomfortable. She asked deep questions about his personal life, what drove him at work, his greatest fears, and his biggest insecurities. Katherine showed an unsettling talent for fun. During a very memorable session in May 1870, she asked Dr. Hartwell about a painful event from his childhood that he had never talked about with anyone else. When they were both 12, he accidentally drowned a girl named Sarah Mitchell. Katherine described the event in precise details that matched Hartwell's memories. She talked about the exact weather that day, the exact words that were said, and even Hartwell's guilt and shame that had been with him ever since. What was more troubling than Katherine's knowledge that couldn't have been true was how she used it. She didn't just tell secrets. They were very accurate psychological tools that she used to probe and control the feelings of the people around her. During her meetings with Hartwell, she was able to make him question both his professional skills and his own sanity. Dr. Hartwell started carefully writing down other strange things that happened when Katherine was around. While the heating system was working properly and everything else in the room stayed the same, the temperature in her room was always 4 to 6 degrees Celsius lower than the rest of the hospital. No matter how well she took care of the plants, those that were put near her window would wither and die within days. Even stranger, some medical staff said they had scary experiences when they were near Katherine's room for long amounts of time. Nurses said they started having severe headaches, feeling sick for no reason, and having vivid nightmares as soon as they started working in her area. 2 guards asked to be moved to different parts of the hospital because they felt like they were always being watched, even when Katherine was clearly sleeping. During the summer and fall of 1870, Dr. Hartwell did an experiment with Katherine that was very different from what was normal in medicine at the time. He was sure that her case was a one-of-a-kind chance to make big steps forward in medicine's understanding of the mind and what it can do. Memory, language skills, general knowledge, and cognitive powers were tested in depth as part of the experiments. Katherine had to take tests that are usually only given to people with a lot of education. These tests included difficult logic problems, philosophical analysis, and questions about her knowledge of history. Across all of these tests, she did much better than what a child her age and level of education should be able to do. Dr. Hartwell also did tests to try to figure out where Katherine got her impossible information. She was given pictures of people she had never met, strange history records, and even writings in languages that no longer exist. Katherine showed a surprising level of familiarity with the material in each case, giving detailed details she couldn't have learned any other way. Katherine was shown a picture of an unknown guy who had died 10 years earlier in a faraway city as part of an experiment that revealed a lot. She was able to give the man's full name, information about his family, the exact reason of his death, and even details about his habits and personality without any other information. Upon further investigation, Hartwell found that all the information Katherine gave him was totally correct. During these tests, Katherine started to show what Hartwell called premonitory abilities. She could accurately predict what would happen in the future, and these predictions were always disturbingly accurate. It was clear that she knew 3 specific hospital patients were going to die. She told them when they would die and how they would die. All of the time she was right about what would happen. Katherine's mental and magical powers seemed to be getting stronger over time, but in the winter of 1870 to 1871, her health started to get worse in a scary way. The worsening didn't follow any known medical trends, and seemed to be linked in some way to the strange symptoms she was showing. Katherine started losing a lot of weight, even though she seemed to be eating normally. Her skin turned pale and almost see-through, and you could see blue lines through the epidermis. She noticed that her hair was getting darker and thicker, and it started to look more like animal fur than human hair. What was even scarier was that Katherine started having periods of being completely still that lasted for hours. During these episodes, she did not move at all, like a doll, and did not react to anything outside of her. Her heartbeat and breathing were fine, but she didn't blink, move, or answer when you spoke to her. Dr. Hartwell found that these times of stiffness happened at the same time as the most intense supernatural events. Things started moving faster and more frequently during these times, and the temperature dropped a lot. Some medical staff members also said they were feeling dizzy, sick, and like something invisible was present in the room. Katherine started to talk during these times of stiffness, but her voice sounded very different from how she normally talks. People got dizzy when she spoke with more than one voice at the same time, causing an impossible harmonic effect. At other times, her voice took on adult-sounding tones and timbres, as if other people were speaking through her. Katherine told even more detailed and impossible facts about people and events during these episodes. She talked about people who had died decades ago, as if she knew them personally, and gave accurate accounts of historical events that happened hundreds of years before she was born. She also made statements about the future that always came true. It was during this time that Katherine's predictions became more true and scary. She knew exactly when and where important politicians would die, when and where nature disasters would happen, and even about personal events in the lives of medical staff. All of her predictions came true just the way she said they would. After studying Katherine for more than a year, Dr. Hartwell made a choice in May 1871 that would forever change how we think about her case. He chose to take a picture of her for his medical records. The choice wasn't made without much thought. Hartwell had noticed that Katherine looked completely different at different times and to different people. Some hospital staff said she looked like a normal girl, maybe a little pale and thin, but nothing out of the ordinary. Others found something very disturbing about the way she looked, an undefined quality that made them feel very uncomfortable and worried. Hartwell had himself been through this change in perception. Katherine sometimes looked just like the child she was, a 9-year-old girl, albeit one who was very smart and troubled. At other times, especially when she was being stiff or showing off her most amazing skills, she looked like something much older and more powerful than a human child. Hartwell hoped that a picture would accurately show how Katherine really looked, giving reliable visual proof that could be studied, analyzed, and compared over time. He also hoped that the picture would show things about her state that weren't clear from looking at her directly. At the time, medical photography was still pretty new, but it was quickly becoming an important way to record mental cases. A number of innovative hospitals were using photography to make pictures of their patients so that they could be identified and so that researchers could look for links between how people look and their mental health. Dr. Hartwell got in touch with James Thornton, a medical portrait photographer who had worked with a number of Boston area mental hospitals. Thornton was known for being professional, discreet, and skilled, and for having worked with people in a range of mental and physical states. When Hartwell told Thornton about the case, the photographer was at first interested in it from a scientific point of view. During his work, he took pictures of hundreds of psychiatric patients, so he was used to strange situations. Thornton agreed to hold the photo shoot in a controlled environment, and with special tools that would let him capture the subject's finer details and subtleties of look. The picture shoot was set for the morning of June 15, 1871, which was exactly 15 months after Katherine got to the hospital. Thursday morning was chosen by Dr. Hartwell because he had seen that Katherine was usually quieter and more willing to help in the morning. At 9 a.m., James Thornton brought his heavy photography gear to the hospital. It included a large format camera, a sturdy tripod, glass plates for taking pictures, and all the chemicals he would need to process the pictures there and then. He had taken pictures of a lot of mental patients before, so he knew what to expect: agitation, refusal to cooperate, or behavior that was hard to predict. But when Thornton was taken to Katherine's room, he saw right away that this session was different. Even though it was early in the morning and the windows were facing the right way, the light in the room seemed off. While during the 30 minutes or so that were spent getting ready, Katherine did not move at all and was totally silent. According to Thornton, she seemed to know exactly where to look and how to place herself before he even told her. It was like she knew the technical aspects of photography without being told. When Thornton was ready to take the picture, he made a few last changes to his camera and told Katherine to face the lens directly. At this very moment, something strange happened, which Thornton would later call the most disturbing experience of my entire professional career. As soon as Katherine looked at the camera, Thornton felt a strong physical sensation, like an invisible force had passed through him. The temperature dropped quickly and sharply, making him shiver without meaning to. Even stranger, he was sure that he wasn't just taking pictures of Katherine, but that something much bigger and more complicated was related to her or working through her. Thornton pressed the shutter button on his camera, exposing the glass plate for about 15 seconds. This was enough time for the technology of the time to take a clear picture. While those 15 seconds were going on, he kept looking at Katherine and felt what he later called being photographed by her while simultaneously photographing her. Right after the exposure, Thornton used the makeshift lab he had set up in a room next door to handle the photographic plate. At that time, the process of developing photos needed careful handling of dangerous chemicals and exact timing. But Thornton had a lot of experience and was sure of his skill. While working on the glass plate, he knew right away that something wasn't right. He had been taking pictures for decades and had never seen designs or textures like the ones that were made by the chemicals reacting in such a strange way. The picture on the plate looked like it was developing unevenly, with some parts getting lighter very quickly and others staying dark. When the picture was finally fully developed, Thornton and Dr. Hartwell were both quiet for a while, as they tried to figure out what they were seeing. The picture that came out of the camera plate was both exactly what they were expecting, and nothing at all like what they could have imagined. Katherine was sitting in the same spot in the picture that she had been during the session. She was wearing the same clothes and was in the same room. There were all the simple physical details that should have been there. But there was something very troubling about the picture that couldn't be explained logically. No matter what angle you looked at the picture from, Katherine's eyes seemed to be looking right at the person looking at it. Even stranger, they have an unreal depth, as if the picture didn't just show the top of her eyes, but also all the layers below it. People who saw it said they felt like they could fall into those eyes if they looked too long. The way Katherine looked in the picture was also unsettling. It wasn't exactly the same look she had worn during the session, but it wasn't completely different either. It looked like the camera caught a look that was a little out of phase with reality, showing something that was there, but usually couldn't be seen. Even scarier, Thornton and Hartwell started to see things in the picture that shouldn't have been there as they looked at it more closely. There were shadows in the picture that didn't match the lighting in the room during the practice. It looked like fuzzy, moving shapes were around the edges of the picture, as if other presences had been caught in it with Katherine. The medical staff at Danvers Hospital were very interested in and argued about Katherine's picture very quickly. Dr. Hartwell called a special meeting of all the top doctors at the hospital to look at the image and talk about what it means for the case. At first, Dr. William Foster, the second most experienced doctor in the hospital, thought that the strange things in the picture were caused by problems with the tools or the development process. According to him, the unsettling quality of the picture might have come from the strange lighting in Katherine's room, and possibly issues with the chemicals used to take the picture. This idea was quickly thrown out, though, when James Thornton went back to the hospital to take control pictures with the same drugs, tools, and even room. The control pictures turned out just fine, with none of the problems that were in Katherine's picture. At the time, Dr. Margaret Sinclair was one of the few women working as a psychiatrist, and she came up with a more radical idea. She mentioned that Katherine might have a very rare neurological condition that affected not only her mind, but also how she moved and interacted with the world around her. Sinclair had read about people in Europe who were said to have shown telekinetic skills during very bad psychotic episodes. The medical staff gave this idea more support when they carefully looked over all the reported events connected to Katherine, such as things moving without touching, changes in temperature, and effects on plants and people. Sinclair said that these effects might be caused by an unknown brain condition that creates strange bioelectric fields. Even though Sinclair's idea interested Dr. Hartwell, he kept a healthy scientific skepticism. He suggested a set of carefully planned tests to see if Katherine was really making some kind of measured physical energy. Experiments like these would take exact readings of temperature and magnetic fields, and they might even try to take pictures of what they think are energy fields. When pictures of Katherine were sent to other doctors in Boston, New York, and even Europe who were at the cutting edge of psychiatric study, the medical debate about her case got even more heated. All of the replies were upsetting. All of the experts who were asked agreed that the picture showed things they had never seen before in all their years of experience with medical photography. Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann, a famous German psychotherapist who studies hysteria and dissociation, looked at the picture and wrote a long letter about it. He said Katherine might have an extreme form of multiple personality disorder, in which different personalities lived in her mind at the same time and changed how she looked in ways that the camera could see but not the human eye. Katherine's health quickly got worse after the picture session in June 1871, which surprised even Dr. Hartwell, who had been watching her slowly get worse over the previous months. The act of being shot seemed to have caused major changes in her mental and physical health. Katherine started staying in a state of catatonic rigidity for longer and longer amounts of time. These episodes used to only last a few hours, but now they last whole days. During these times, she did not move at all and did not react to anything outside of her. She was aware of what was going on around her, though. Her eyes stayed open and alert, following movement and focused on certain people. She didn't speak or move on her own, though. Even scarier, the strange things that were happening around Katherine got a lot stronger during these long periods of catatonia. Even in the summer, her room temperature often dropped so low that ice formed on the windows. Things moved more often and violently, and they were sometimes thrown across the room with enough force to damage walls and furniture. The medical staff started saying that going into Katherine's room was becoming more and more upsetting. A lot of people said they heard voices whispering in languages they didn't know, saw shadowy figures moving in their peripheral vision, and felt very strong physical effects like extreme nausea and debilitating vertigo. In August 1871, Sister Margaret O'Connell asked to be moved permanently to a different part of the hospital. She had been working bravely with Katherine for months. She asked to be transferred and wrote, "I can no longer in good conscience continue working near that child. Whatever is happening to her is spreading beyond her room, and I fear for all of our safety." Following the picture, Katherine's physical decline also sped up. She lost so much weight that she looked almost like she was made of bones. Veins and nerves could be seen clearly through her skin's epidermis, because it became clear. Her hair turned as black as coal and grew very quickly to an unusually long length. Katherine's last catatonic state happened in September 1871. Not eating, drinking, or talking at all for 6 weeks in a row, she did not move at all. Medically, she should have died of dehydration within days, but she kept living and doing basic things with her body in ways that Dr. Hartwell couldn't explain. During her last few weeks, Katherine stayed awake and aware. She kept her eyes on people around the room and sometimes focused very intently on certain points, as if she were seeing something that other people couldn't. She would sometimes move her lips a little, as if she were talking to someone who wasn't there,